Hello guys, this is your friend and we are back with a new fanfic. Which is what if Naruto built a harem with Tsubaki x Sakura x Shizune x Tsunade, part 2. And if you enjoy this fanfic then please press the like button and subscribe to my channel for more fanfic like this. And now let's start the fanfic. It's good to see you again, Naruto, it's been too long, she began, still smiling, though I do wish that it was under better circumstances. Well, it's always good to see you, he responded, so I'll take whatever circumstances I can get if it gives me a chance to talk to you again. Tsubaki couldn't help but blush at such a declaration. She thanked him shyly as she started making small talk with him, running some scans and performing a routine healing jutsu so that the healing in his arm could be accelerated. She noted an additional injury on his body that wasn't on his chart. She turned to Naruto and indulged her curiosity. Naruto, what is this injury on your head? And why isn't it on your chart, here? Naruto looked at her in confusion. What do you mean? Tsubaki's confusion turned into surprise, though she kept an even tone in her voice. How did you hurt your head? Do you not feel any pain around your head right now? Well, a little. Sakura gave me a knock to my skull when I was in Grandma Tsunade's office, but it's what I normally feel after she does that. Tsubaki's eyes narrowed. Do you know who it was that created this chart? I think Sakura did. Why? Has anyone else besides Sakura seen you or treated you since you were brought here? Well, no. Naruto's confusion seemed to grow at Tsubaki's few moments of thoughtful contemplation. Naruto, Tsubaki broke the silence, her face suddenly adopting a serious expression. I'm going to issue a formal request that Sakura Haruno not be allowed to treat you for the foreseeable future. I need to speak to the Hokage. Whoa, wait a minute. Naruto began, shocked at the brunette medic's admission. Why don't you want Sakura treating me? Because you've sustained injuries that are not listed here on this chart, which means that Sakura either didn't record them when she constructed your chart, or you've sustained them since you were admitted. For a medic to not report such injuries if they are aware of them is unethical and illegal. Naruto just stared at her for a few moments. Tsubaki continued, Naruto, there are signs of blunt force trauma, past and present, to your skull. Your healing ability, thankfully, allows you to recover from injuries of even that severity. Still, though, if it was anyone else, these injuries could have been terminal or even fatal. Naruto's eyes went wide. Sakura's punches to the head were affecting him that badly. He did find that he had trouble thinking or seeing straight for a few days any time after Sakura hit him on the top of his head. And her hits hurt, which was saying something, considering Naruto's tolerance for pain. Naruto, I know you don't want a friend of yours to get into trouble, Tsubaki said, but this has to be reported, it's the law. Naruto, seeing the pretty medic's urgency, pretty. I'll admit, she certainly is, but where'd that come from? Naruto closed his eyes, sighed and nodded. Tsubaki made a few additional notes to the chart at the foot of Naruto's bed and left to find the Hokage. Tsunade frowned in concern, several issues weighing on her mind. The first and foremost was the damage done to Kakuzu's body from the wind style, Rasenshuriken, and the corresponding damage to Naruto's arm. She hoped that Naruto would heed the warnings about using the jutsu unless a way could be found to eliminate the damage to the user. The other issue was Sakura's continual loss of temper with Naruto over nothing. Just because Naruto wasn't paying her as much attention as he used to was not a reason for her to go off on him any time she felt like it. And then to go so far as to hit him simply because he objected to going to the hospital. Most people object to that. It would also seem that Sakura had been making herself a bit scarce when Tsunade would have the time to speak with her about the matter. As it wasn't a matter of critical urgency right now, she would have to let it slide in favor of more urgent and higher priority issues. Lady Tsunade, she heard a familiar female voice ask. She looked up to see a welcome sight. Tsubaki, she said with some relief, it's good to see a friend. Please, come in. Thank you, my lady, Tsubaki responded as she quickly entered and closed the door. Tsubaki briskly made her way to Tsunade's desk, and placed a copy of the chart she had just finished updating in front of Tsunade. Tsunade, I wish this was a friendly visit, but I felt that this was something you'd need to address right away. Tsunade, not used to the urgency in Tsubaki's voice, frowned in confusion. Okay, what is it? This is a copy of Naruto Uzumaki's current chart. Please have a look at it. She gestured to the documents she had laid in front of the older blonde. Tsunade picked it up and started going through it. Her eyes narrowed the more she read. When she was done, she put the chart down and stared hard at Tsubaki. To her surprise, Tsubaki didn't even flinch. Tsubaki, do you mean to tell me with this chart that you believe Sakura Haruno either didn't check Naruto's head for injuries or deliberately left them off of his chart? That's exactly what I mean to tell you, Lady Tsunade, she responded with firm conviction. In fact, I've already placed in a request with Shizune to keep Sakura Haruno from being allowed to treat Naruto for the remainder of his stay in the hospital until we can get to the bottom of this. If injuries of this nature are not on this chart, either she doesn't know what she's doing, or worse, she does. Tsunade's eyes widened at this. Tsubaki, still not done, continued, I'm also requesting that you go to his room and check my findings. I believe I've found something else that I didn't write onto that chart yet because I frankly couldn't believe what I found, so I'd ask if you could go over him as well and see if he has, well, inflammation to his brain. Encephalitis. Tsunade responded, stunned. That's just it. There's no trace of any pathogens that would cause encephalitis in his body, but I'm pretty sure his brain is swollen. The weird thing, though, is that he's not showing any outward symptoms of a closed head injury. At Tsubaki's diagnosis, Tsunade wasted no time. She got up from her desk and headed straight to the hospital. Follow me, she ordered Tsubaki. Tsubaki was on her heels the whole way. Once they got to Naruto's room, there was Naruto, and Sakura was there with him, apparently about to hit him on the head again, with the clipboard that had his chart on it. Freeze where you are, Sakura. Tsunade bellowed out. Sakura, in her surprise, froze in her tracks. What? Sakura asked in her confusion, lowering her arm. Naruto's flinch also relaxed. Tsunade quickly moved around to Naruto's bedside, her hand covered in green medical chakra as she started gently rubbing her palm around his head. Tsubaki followed her in, turning her gaze towards Sakura. What are you doing in this room, Sakura? Tsubaki asked. What do you mean? What am I doing in here? I'm treating my teammate, she responded indignantly. After I found a few discrepancies on his chart, Tsubaki paid attention to Sakura's facial expressions as she was explaining herself. Sakura seemed genuinely confused. I made a formal request to Shizune that you not be allowed in here to treat him. Discrepancies. What discrepancies? I listed every injury that he was admitted for. What about the injuries to his head? Sakura's confusion seemed to grow. What injuries to his head? What in the world are you talking about? Whether you know or not is not the issue right now. You are not authorized to be in this room. Tsubaki informed her firmly. Actually, Sakura, stay for now, but please sit over there, Tsunade instructed, pointing to a chair on the far side of the room while still focusing on scanning Naruto's head. After several minutes, Tsunade was done. You're right, Tsubaki. He does have a closed head injury. Sakura gasped upon hearing this. She brought her hands up to her face in her surprise. Tsubaki turned to the pink-haired girl upon hearing her gasp before turning her attention back to Naruto. Tsunade spoke up once more. Naruto, I'm going to use a technique that should reduce some of the pressure you must be feeling on your head, okay? It'll hurt a bit, but you'll feel a lot better afterwards. Naruto just nodded, trusting the woman to treat him properly. Tsunade performed a few hand seals and the green in her hands seemed to deepen and become a slightly darker shade. She put her hands to Naruto's head. At first, he didn't seem to feel anything different, but after a few seconds, He closed his eyes and began to grit his teeth. Shortly after this, a pained groan made itself known from the back of Naruto's throat. After a couple of minutes of this, Naruto slumped back, completely unconscious. Tsunade ran through a few more techniques, apparently taking care of some of the after effects of her jutsu before performing a final scan. He should be fine. Now, Tsunade breathed out at last. Tsubaki, scan him again, please. Tsubaki followed the blonde's orders, running the scan and confirming Tsunade's findings. She nodded as she finished up. Both of them turned to Sakura. Sakura, Tsunade began, explain yourself. Well, I didn't know he had sustained any injuries to his head, she finally got out. Ball up your fist, please, Tsunade ordered firmly. What? Do it. Okay, Sakura said nervously, balling up her fist and presenting it to Tsunade. Tsunade took a moment to do a few visual measurements on Sakura's closed fist. Once she was done, Tsunade explained somewhat darkly, the size and indentations of your fist match many of the injuries to Naruto's head, Sakura. You're apparently the one who gave him that injury, and some of his other past injuries as well. Sakura gasped once more, tears beginning to well into her eyes. She turned her gaze to him, looking forlorn. I didn't know. Sakura, I can only hope that's the honest truth, because I'd hate to think what it meant if you did know, Tsunade said, her tone leaving no room for excuse on Sakura's part, but regardless of whether or not you knew about that, what excuse do you have for violating protocol and coming into this room when instructions were clearly given for you not to? I just wanted to see my friend. Your friend? Do you give head injuries to all your friends? You knew that you were not to come in here, did you not? Tsubaki interrupted as she became agitated. Sakura nodded to Tsubaki. Sakura, Tsunade brought the girl's attention back to herself, as I don't believe you honestly meant Naruto any harm, I'll be lenient as far as a penalty goes. But you need to understand something. Your actions here today, and your negligence concerning all of Naruto's injuries can be considered gross medical malpractice. I'll allow you to keep your rank and continue working as a medic, but as of now, your apprenticeship under me is over. Sakura gasped once more as tears began to freely flow. Please, Lady Tsunade, not that. Would you rather I send you to prison? Tsunade interrupted, causing Sakura to go wide-eyed, because that's the due penalty for this. After a few moments' pause, Tsunade continued, Sakura, I have never condoned your overly volatile and abusive treatment of Naruto. Granted, I know I've hit Jiraiya in the past, and there was the one time that I beat him to near death for being a perverted lecher. But that one time, I regretted it, I still regret it to this day. I went too far, and you've never seen me hit him since, nor will you. You, on the other hand, have hit Naruto simply because you were annoyed with him, which is one issue in and of itself, but because you know my super strength technique, that makes you a clear and present danger to his life and health. Sakura seemed to shrink in on herself at her master's harsh rebuke. Tsunade continued, as I said, Sakura, your apprenticeship with me is over. And if I ever hear of you hitting Naruto again, especially around the head, the day I hear of that will be the day that your career as both a medic and as a ninja end, too. Am I understood? Sakura could do not but hang her head in shame. Yes, Lady Tsunade. Good. Now leave this room and do not come back in for the remainder of Naruto's stay here. Sakura simply nodded before slowly leaving the room. Tsunade could only look on in angry disappointment. Tsubaki honestly didn't know what to say. After a few minutes, Tsunade began to shed a few tears of her own and hang her head, shaking it back and forth. I didn't imagine in a million years that this would happen. I didn't imagine that she'd take after my own failings like this, she said quietly. Tsubaki sighed. Lady Tsunade, I'm sorry about all of this. No, you have nothing to apologize for. You did the right and ethical thing by bringing this to my attention, Tsubaki. Thank you. You're welcome, and I promise that Naruto will get well quickly while he's under my care, here. Tsunade turned to Tsubaki for a moment before smiling with narrow eyes and asking slyly, "You have a soft spot for Naruto, don't you?" Tsubaki blushed a deep red suddenly, beginning to sputter. As she realized she was busted, she calmed down and nodded, "Yeah, maybe a little." Tsunade laughed before her smile softened and gestured to the woman, "I don't think so, you've got more than a little soft spot for him. Tell you what. You can tell me all about it over sake tonight." Tsubaki laughed, "Deal." Both of them left Naruto's room, allowing him some much-needed rest. "By the way," Tsunade added as they both walked down the hall, "it looks like I'll need a new apprentice now." Interested? Being Tsunade's apprentice certainly wasn't easy. Tsubaki was training day in and day out with Tsunade whenever time permitted. Tsunade was amazed once more at how Tsubaki took to her master's teachings like a fish to water, approaching them with a drive that even Sakura had failed to show. Her medical jutsu were already top-notch, and the advanced chakra control exercises that Tsunade had shown her brought her already stellar chakra control to new heights. Tsubaki also started serving as Tsunade's assistant when Shizune was unavailable, or out on a mission. Tsunade looked forward to these times, as while Shizune would always take away Tsunade's precious sake, Tsubaki would usually drink with her. Of course, she'd make sure that Tsunade drank in moderation while on duty, as she herself would, but being the Hokage was stressful. There were days when Tsunade quite frankly needed a drink or 10, especially with what Homura, Kaharu and Danzo put the poor woman through. Thinking of those three always put Tsubaki on edge. She had once nearly lost her temper with all of them and was about to show them her newfound prowess with Tsunade's super strength technique, but fortunately, it turned out not to be necessary. The elders also learned to stay away from Tsunade's office unless it was a matter that could not wait, as unlike Shizune, Tsubaki wasn't intimidated by them in the least. They weren't getting to Tsunade if they didn't absolutely need to. Not on her watch. Once Shizune and team had returned from the mission to retrieve and seal the three-tailed turtle, with no turtle to show for all of their efforts, Tsubaki spent that night commiserating with Tsunade over the full onslaught of the elders that Shizune certainly stood no chance against. It had been a wonderfully miserable night of getting completely trashed and forgetting, at least until the next morning, to be painfully reminded not only by circumstances but by their hangovers as well. Naruto had also returned with the sealing team, but was sent out almost immediately afterwards once intel had been received that Orochimaru had been killed by Sasuke Uchiha. He had been given a mission to find and capture Itachi Uchiha, who had been spotted in the Land of Fire. It was also during this time that Jiraiya had gone to the village hidden in the rain. Tsunade had had a horrible, sinking feeling in her gut when Jiraiya left, and she immediately went to Tsubaki's home. Tsubaki, who hadn't ever seen Tsunade in such a state, elected to allow her to come into her home and do their drinking there. Tsunade was in tears about it all, meanwhile all Tsubaki could do was hug the woman. Their drinking that night consisted more of tea than sake. How did we develop such a kinship with each other? Tsubaki thought offhand, she was certainly my hero growing up, but it's amazing how we've become such great friends. What makes her trust me so much? Deciding to voice her thoughts once Tsunade had calmed down and was content again, she asked, "Tsunade. Just curious, how did we become such great friends in so short a time? I mean, why do you trust me so much?" Tsunade, without missing a beat, answered, "I honestly think you're the most objective person I've ever met in this village, Tsubaki. That's at least what makes me trust you as much as I do." "What makes you say that?" "Your opinion of Naruto and how you formed it, for one. Of all the people I've ever spoken to in this village, you're the only person besides Tsuki and Ayame Ichiraku who have ever taken a fair, objective look at him. It's funny, Shizune did, too when we first met him. Tsubaki simply nodded, listening to her mentor and friend while Tsunade told her the story of how she first met Naruto. They spent their evening exchanging stories about Naruto, some of which had been told before, some of which had not. After Tsunade had crashed there for the evening, they both continued the next day as they usually would, in slightly better spirits than they would have otherwise been. Naruto and team had just gotten back from the mission to capture and retrieve Itachi Uchiha. They came up with nothing. Apparently, Itachi had been killed by Sasuke by the time they got there, and blood stains were the only evidence of the battle that had taken place. That wasn't the main issue that was bothering Tsubaki at the moment. What was bothering Tsubaki was how Naruto would take the news about Jiraiya's being killed in the Hidden Rain. He didn't take it well. Tsubaki received the news from Shizune as to what had taken place in Tsunade's office. The woman knew that Tsunade would probably want to be left alone right now. If she wanted company, she'd seek it out. She also knew that Tsunade would be alright. It was Naruto that she was worried about right now. As soon as her shift ended, she began her search for him. It was late. The sun had long since set. She couldn't find him in any of his normal haunts. He wasn't at Ichiraku's, he wasn't on the Hokage monument, he wasn't even at home. Where was he? She continued searching. She had to find him. After several hours of continuous searching, she had become too tired to continue her search. She would rest and try again tomorrow. She chanced by a convenience store, and caught a glimpse of orange out of the corner of her eye. Turning her gaze in the direction of the orange, she saw him, and the state that he was in caused her stomach to clench and her heart to break. There he was, sitting on a bench in a slumped-over position. Tears were streaming down his face. He wasn't wearing his jacket. He was in his orange track suit pants and a black t-shirt. He was just staring at the ground, oblivious to any and all around him. In his hand was a double-stick popsicle, melting and dripping onto the street below. He hadn't made any attempt to eat it. Tsubaki felt her own tears begin to form. She walked over to him slowly. He hadn't noticed her at all. Once she reached him, she knelt down and took his free hand in both of her own. This got his attention, as he brought his gaze up to look the woman in the eye. "Tsubaki," he muttered, surprised to see her. She moved to sit beside him on the bench. Once she was situated, not having let go of his hand, she said softly through her tears, "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." Naruto just sat there for a few moments, not knowing what to say. In his discomfort, he began to put on his goofy facade with closed eyes and make light of his feelings. It's okay, Tsubaki, I'm fine." Tsubaki interrupted him by bringing a hand up to his face and gently resting it there, causing his eyes to snap open and his grin to turn into a half-gape. "Naruto, please," she began, "don't do this to yourself." Her voice began to break as she continued, "And please don't do that to me, either." Naruto just sat there, staring wide-eyed at the woman who was breaking through his emotional defenses. He turned his head away while averting his gaze from hers. Tsubaki, however, brought the hand that was on his cheek to his chin and gently turned his gaze back to her own. Seeing that she had his full attention again, she smiled softly through her tears, brought her hand back up to his cheek, and gently addressed him, "It's all right." Naruto seemed to wrestle with what to do. He wasn't sure how to respond to this woman that could worm her way through his barriers in a way nobody else had ever been able to do. As his eyes flitted this way and that, Tsubaki leaned in and kissed Naruto on his other cheek, bringing his attention back to her and stopping his panicked fidgeting. After lingering there for a few seconds, she pulled back and stared into his eyes again. Smiling just as softly, her eyes flowing with even more tears than before, she told him once more, this time a little more urgently, "It's all right." Feeling his barriers begin to break even further, and panic begin to arise anew, Naruto closed his eyes and forcibly wrenched his gaze and his head away from her. Tsubaki, however, would have none of that. She let go of his hand and brought both hands up to his cheeks. Cupping his face in her hands, she gently yet forcibly brought his face back around to meet hers as she threw herself forward while pulling him towards her, smashing her lips into his own. Naruto froze, his eyes as wide as dinner plates. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he noted that he had allowed the popsicle to drop from his hand. He gasped as he felt the woman's tongue snake into his mouth. As Naruto's own tongue instinctively danced with hers, he could feel one of her hands making its way to the back of his head with a looser grip on him. Tsubaki's sobs could be heard through her kiss, and somehow Naruto knew what she was trying to tell him. This kiss was not only a show of affection and an attempt at comfort, but a plea to let her in, into his heart, into his thoughts, and at least right now, into his life. Tsubaki finally pulled away slowly, tears still streaming down her face. Naruto just looked on, stunned, confused, yet still shedding silent tears. Tsubaki started gently stroking his face with the hand that was still on his cheek. "It's all right, Naruto, it's all right," she said once more, this time her tone a pleading one. Naruto understood her words, now. She wanted him to know that he was safe with her. It was all right for him to let his walls down and be who he really was, to express and let out what he really felt. It was all right for him to grieve the way he needed to grieve, and to allow this woman to support and comfort him through it. So many things went through Naruto's mind at that point. Why was this beautiful, precious creature going so far out of her way to help him? What about him made her think he was worth her while? What was it about her that she seemed to know him well enough to get to his fragile, wounded heart? The answer came as quickly as the questions did. She knew because she could relate. He wasn't sure about the recognition she always seemed to show him before, but right now, he knew where she could relate to him. She'd lost her daughter, the closest person to her as well. Right now, she knew exactly how he felt. She also knew exactly what he needed to be able to do to work his way through this, as well. Unable to hold back the torrent of feelings any longer, he began to break down and lean into her, sobs forcing themselves up from his throat. She brought him into a warm, tight, comforting embrace, kissing the side of his face that was next to hers while doing so and sobbing with him. It's all right, she whispered to him softly as he began to bawl and wail, wrapping his own arms around her and clinging to her as though his life depended on it. She never imagined she would hear such heart-wrenching cries from this man, this seemingly unbreakable spirit. Even when the third had died, Naruto's reaction wasn't anything like this. She just let him cry into her. She sat there as he sobbed into first her shoulder, and then into her blouse-clad bosom. She held him there, whispering sweet words of comfort to him, crying with him as he let out the anguish and grief that was almost overwhelming him. After an indeterminate amount of time, Naruto had cried himself out. He got up off the woman, noting where he was. He looked at her slowly, seeing her own tear-stained, puffy face and laughing sheepishly. Sorry, Naruto, it's all right, she interrupted gently, her own tears not having stopped yet. Naruto, not knowing what to make of her expression, tried to excuse himself. Well, I appreciate what you just did for me. I guess I should be getting home now. No, Tsubaki said forcefully, grabbing his hand before he could leave. Naruto, I'm not leaving you alone, tonight. Naruto frowned in confusion at her. Come with me, Tsubaki gently ordered, standing up and leading him by the hand. Too tired to argue, Naruto allowed himself to be pulled along by Tsubaki. After pulling him into the streets, Tsubaki pulled him into another quick hug and used Shunshin to teleport back to her apartment. When they reappeared, Naruto took a few seconds to get his bearings and acquaint himself to his location. He could see the Hokage Tower close by, off to the right of what he guessed was Tsubaki's apartment building, letting him know where he was. Tsubaki quickly unlocked her apartment and led Naruto inside. After seeing her close and lock her front door, Naruto voiced his confusion. Tsubaki, not that I mind, but why have you brought me here? Because you don't need to be by yourself right now. Please, just take the word of someone who knows, she pleaded with him softly yet urgently. She then went through what Naruto guessed was her routine for when she arrived home after a hard day at work, removing her sandals, checking for messages delivered while she was out, and various other mundane tasks. Make yourself at home, okay? I'll be done in a few minutes, she offered. Naruto sighed and nodded, seating himself down on one of her couches in her living room. Not knowing what to do or say, he settled for leaning his head back against the back of the couch, closing his eyes. His mind's eye flooded his thoughts with images of Jiraiya, times they'd laughed together, special moments they'd experienced during their training trip, times when they both had to flee for their lives from righteously angry women that the pervert had peeked on, as all the while Jiraiya shouted that he regretted nothing. Naruto's memories seemed to fixate on the times when Jiraiya had bought and shared double-stick popsicles with him. Tears once again came unbidden to Naruto's eyes as a few sobs escaped his throat once more. After a few moments of this, a soft hand to his face caused him to open his eyes once more. His gaze fell upon Tsubaki, who had come over to him once she'd heard his sobs again. While no longer in tears the way he was, her eyes were still filled with a knowing pain for him. She took both of his hands in hers and pulled. Naruto stood up and allowed him to lead her through her apartment through a hallway and into a door. When Naruto saw a queen-sized bed, his eyes went wide as he turned his gaze to her. She gently turned him around so that he was now walking backwards, and instead of pulling him, she was now gently pushing him into her bedroom, closing the door behind her. Tsubaki, Naruto began, only to be interrupted by her raising a finger to his lips, followed by a gentle kiss. That kiss was followed by several more, and within a few moments, Tsubaki was working Naruto's shirt off of his body. Is this a good idea? Naruto barely whispered out, unable to process how he should react, tears still flowing from his eyes in the grief that his memories of Jiraiya brought on. Not important right now, Tsubaki answered as she proceeded kissing him once more while lifting his shirt off of him. It wasn't long before both of them were in nothing but their undergarments. Naruto was still shedding tears, while Tsubaki was running her hands all over Naruto's exposed upper body. Her kisses, while still gentle, had turned from chaste to passionate as she began using her tongue to play with his own once more. Just let go, Naruto, I've invited you into my home, she spoke between kisses as she gently pushed Naruto onto her bed. I've invited you into my bed. Please, let me comfort you tonight. Lemon. Tsubaki removed her bra and panties slowly, exposing her naked body to Naruto. Naruto, no longer able to think straight with the tempest of emotions raging through him, relented to her request and removed his boxers. Despite both of them being completely exposed before each other, they hadn't broken eye contact. Tender, caring chocolate brown eyes stared into dazzling electric blue pools. Tsubaki got into the bed on her knees, and slowly moved to straddle the blonde as he sat with his back against the headboard. Tsubaki's hands continued exploring his body as she looked deep into his eyes and continued kissing him lovingly. Naruto began to kiss her in turn. After a few moments, he pulled back and drank in her beautiful form, his hands apprehensively reaching out to touch her. She took his hands in her own, bringing his gaze back to her face. The warmth and acceptance that he saw in her sparkling brown pools caused his apprehension to melt away. She brought his hands to her thighs and began to guide them across her skin, up her legs, over her hips and rear, and upwards, around her back, over her sides and towards her front, bringing them to stop on her supple breasts. She leaned in and began to kiss him again. After a few moments, she opened her eyes to look at him once more, and seeing his nervousness, she asked softly, "Are you all right?" I don't know," he admitted honestly. Naruto, she brought a hand up to his face and began to stroke his cheek again. "This is all for you. We don't have to do anything that you're uncomfortable with, okay? I know that this must be confusing, but I want you to understand, This is an act of comfort and love, okay? You're not obligated to do this now, and I'm not going to hold you to anything in the future as a result of what does or doesn't happen here tonight. Do you understand? Naruto's breathing and pulse began to quicken as he saw the love and sincerity that her eyes presented to him. He nodded in response to her question as he slowly leaned up towards her face and kissed her just as gently and as passionately as she had done to him. After a few minutes, he leaned back and continued looking into her eyes, his hands never having left her breasts the entire time. Are you all right with this? Are you willing to trust me? Tsubaki asked gently. Naruto smiled as warmly as he could and nodded slowly. Tsubaki thought it best to keep things simple tonight, given Naruto's evident lack of experience with sexual intimacy and the turbulent instability of the emotional roller coaster that the next few days were sure to be for him. Without saying another word, she got off him and rolled over to the nightstand on her side of the bed. Opening the drawer, she pulled out a bottle that Naruto saw was labeled as sexual lubricant before closing it. Opening the bottle and putting some of the slick, oily fluid into her right hand, she reached down to his hard shaft and began to apply it slowly and gently, rubbing her hand and fingers up and down, making sure she covered it all. His twitches at the contact of her warm, soft hand were not lost on Tsubaki, and neither were the involuntary moans that escaped him every few seconds. She smiled as she thought about how good this would feel for him. Once she saw that his manhood was sufficiently lubricated to provide comfortable entry into her canal, she straddled the blonde youth once more, lining his tip to her entrance. Scooting forward slightly, she kissed him once more as she gently lowered herself onto him, bringing gasps from both of them as they became one. Tsubaki leaned into Naruto, wrapping her arms around him, one around his back, the other around his neck, holding his head to her shoulder. Naruto's hands came forward and snaked their way around her back, holding her to him while gently caressing the velvety flesh of the brunette's back, occasionally strumming his fingers through her silky honey-colored locks. She started kissing him once more as she began to slowly move up and down upon his shaft. Not a word was said between the two. The only sounds that came forth from them were gasps and moans that were soft and sensual, their coupling a slow, sensual, intimate dance instead of a fast romp. Tears began to come forth from Naruto's eyes yet again, this time, he wasn't sure why. Tsubaki seemed to understand as she smiled at him, bringing the hand around his head towards his face, kissing him as she continued her slow steady rise and fall, moving every so often to kiss the tears off of his face. After a few minutes, Naruto's hands went from her back to her glutes as he instinctively began to guide her up and down motions with his hands, lifting and relaxing in time with her own bounces onto his member. Before long, Naruto's impending climax made itself known as his moans became louder. Tsubaki, sensing his impending release, leaned more tightly into him, holding him more tightly to herself. Naruto yelled in a groan from the back of his throat as he ejaculated into Tsubaki's womb, the feel of Naruto's seed filling her, triggering her own climax as she yelled out in release, soaking Naruto's groin with her own juices. Lemon end. Both of them took a few moments to recover, spent from the act they had just engaged in. They held each other tightly for a few minutes as they came back down, Tsubaki kissing him softly all the while, before she slowly separated herself from Naruto. She got out of the bed and pulled him out as well before moving to get the covers stained with their fluids off of the bed. She took the sopping linens and blankets and placed them into a hamper before retrieving fresh bedding from her closet and redressing the bed. After the bed was remade, she pulled back the covers and got under them, gently taking Naruto's hand and pulling him into the bed with her. "Are you all right, honey?" she asked once he was situated, stroking his face and hair once more, giving him a gentle, loving smile. "Yeah, I am. I think I'm okay, at least for now," he responded, smiling back, though a few tears still continued to flow down his face. "Let's just go to sleep for now, it's been a long day, and we can talk more in the morning," Tsubaki suggested. Naruto nodded, and reached around to the lamp on the nightstand at his side of the bed, turning it off and laying down on his back. Tsubaki leaned into his side, draping her leg over his own and laying her head and hand on his chest. "Good night, sweetheart," she whispered softly, kissing his chest. "Good night, princess," he whispered back, bringing an arm around her and holding her more closely to himself. Both of them drifted off into a peaceful slumber, seemingly given a reprieve from life's current troubles. Tsubaki came to consciousness, noticing the cool of the room against her bare breasts and stomach more than she normally would. It felt as though she had just been relieved of her source of warmth. Remembering how she fell asleep, she opened her eyes fully and looked around the room, wondering where Naruto had disappeared to. Her eyes came to rest on his silhouette surrounded by the moonlight and starlight making its way through her bedroom window. Naruto had apparently drawn the drapes back so that he could look out into the quiet of the night. His back was turned to her, and she had noted that he had put his boxers back on. She quietly arose from her bed and found the white panties that she had stripped out of before she and Naruto had made love. Picking them up off the floor and putting them on, she quietly walked over to Naruto and snaked her arms underneath his, rubbing her hands around his chest and stomach as she hugged him from the back and pressed her naked breasts into him. Being the exact same height as him, she found the crook between his neck and shoulder to be a perfect place to rest her chin. "Can't sleep?" Tsubaki asked, her voice just above a whisper. "No," Naruto answered just as softly while shaking his head, putting his hands and arms over Tsubaki's and holding them to himself as he stared out the bedroom window into the dark watches of the early morning. "Ryo, for your thoughts," Tsubaki offered, expressing her desire for him to open up to her. Naruto smirked as he turned his head to face her and retorted playfully, "Now I know I'm not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, but is one Ryo really all my thoughts are worth?" 5 Ryo, she countered with a soft laugh. Naruto laughed back, "You drive a hard bargain, you know that, Tsubaki." Both of them simply shared a contented laugh at their little inside joke before stopping. Naruto turned his gaze back out the window, and Tsubaki pressed once more, "Please, Naruto, tell me what's on your mind." "A lot of things, really," Naruto answered honestly, "times with the pervy sage, lessons he taught me, learning about his death, the things I said to Grandma Tsunade when she told me about it." At this, Naruto grew quiet, hanging his head for a few moments before continuing in a whisper, "Oh, Tsubaki, I said some awful things to her." He felt the woman tighten her grip, effectively interrupting his thoughts. He tightened his own grip on her hands and arms. "Do you want to talk about it?" she asked after a few more moments of silence. She noticed his stiffening at the question. I dunno," Naruto responded apprehensively, his voice coming up in volume slightly. "It'll help," Tsubaki offered, "and if you're worried about what I'll think because of anything you said, I promise I won't judge you for it." Naruto sighed before nodding. I told her that if the pervy sage had been Hokage in her place, he never would have let her go to the hidden rain. His voice began to break as fresh tears came. "I basically told her his death was her fault. I didn't even stop to." Naruto's voice completely broke as the unbidden sob burst forth from his throat, "to think about what I was saying, and who I was talking to." He finished as his voice finally lost. Tsubaki could feel his body shaking as it racked with fresh sobs that came forth, though those sobs remained quiet ones. She let Naruto go and turned him around, holding him from the front. He continued sobbing into the woman, wrapping his own arms around her and soaking the skin on her neck and shoulder with his tears. "Oh, Kami, Tsubaki, I'm so ashamed," Naruto admitted through his sobs as he continued clinging to the woman who held him. Tsubaki pulled out of the embrace and led him back to the bed with an arm around his shoulders. He followed the instructions that her gentle prods and pushes were giving to him. Once they had both returned to the warmth of the covers, she held him once more, stroking his hair gently and making soft shushing noises all the while. A few minutes later found Naruto calmer. His sobs had subsided, though his tears were still flowing and he was still sniffling. He picked his head back up, and Tsubaki brought her hand up to his face, caressing it tenderly. Naruto, Tsubaki began, garnering his attention, Tsunade knows you didn't mean it. But still, he began, closing his eyes and hanging his head. Listen to me, she interrupted him, though he still had his eyes closed and his head hung down. Naruto, please, look at me, she urged softly. He slowly raised his head and opened his eyes. Once she saw that she had his attention, Tsubaki continued with a reassuring smile, Tsunade knows you're not a cruel person. She also knows that there are things you don't know about Master Jiraiya's mission. Naruto frowned at this. Like what? Like the fact that Tsunade didn't send him there. He followed a hunch he had about where he might find the Akatsuki. In fact, she urged him not to go, because she had a feeling that it would end badly. Naruto gasped at this, beginning to realize the implications of what he'd accused Tsunade of. Tsubaki continued patiently, Master Jiraiya went anyway, you know that Tsunade wouldn't have been able to stop him. But she also told him to send word to her if he wound up getting in over his head. She stroked his face a little more pointedly to make sure she had his undivided attention, and she would run to his side, herself. Word never reached her of his need for help. We only got word of his death from one of the toads, along with some kind of message. Oh, dear Kami, no, Naruto quietly lamented, before beginning to panic, I have to talk to her. Naruto, Tsubaki interrupted him once more, bringing his attention back to her, before pressing on in the same calm, gentle, quiet tone she'd used since she got out of bed. I told you, she already knows that you didn't mean anything you said. Just think about it for a minute. Did she react at all when you said those things to her? Naruto thought for a moment before shaking his head. Did she even get angry with you? Naruto shook his head again. That should tell you something. She didn't get angry, and she didn't brain you for what you said to her, she finished with a smirk. Naruto looked at her smirk and laughed sheepishly in response, yeah, I guess you're right. Tsubaki nodded before adopting a caring yet serious expression, but there is something you should learn from this. You can't let your emotions get the better of you. Naruto gritted his teeth and closed his eyes, letting out a sigh of frustration, though he responded in an even tone, I know you're right, but I've always had a very hard time with that. She frowned in concern, though she nodded understandingly, I know, and I know that life hasn't been easy for you. I'm sure that's a contributor to your impulsive nature. I'll tell you something, Naruto, it's not bad to listen to your impulses, or to act on impulse at times. You wouldn't be the adventurous soul that you are if you didn't. And there are also times when anger is an appropriate impulse to act upon. But, and this is one of the things that makes a good chunin, she smiled internally when she saw that this grabbed Naruto's full attention, it's important to know when to act on your instincts, and when not to. Naruto's face softened into a confused frown, what do you mean? Think about it this way. With what we've done tonight, and with where we are right now, I'm following my gut as much as you are. I've never done anything so impulsive before, but it just feels right, doesn't it? He nodded, his frown softening as he began to understand. Tsubaki continued, but at the same time, words spoken on a hair trigger have been the cause of more harm, death and destruction than probably anything else on Earth. The destructive power of uncontrolled angry speech, I don't think I can put into words just how immense it is. Most actions of hatred and destruction are usually either triggered by or preceded by words of hatred and anger. I'll bet it was someone's words, spoken who knows how long ago, that ultimately brought about the situation our village is in right now, with the Akatsuki, with the turmoil we're currently experiencing, with who we regard as friend or foe. Naruto's eyes suddenly became alight with understanding. Tsubaki drove the point home with one specific instance, and if you need a more concrete example, consider Sakura Haruno. Naruto frowned once more, this time with curiosity as he wondered where she was going with that. She explained herself. Her own quirks caused her to hit you, a lot. What she didn't stop to think about was the fact that she was doing you grievous bodily injury. When you were in the hospital, and Tsunade performed the technique that relieved the pressure in your head. Remember? Naruto nodded, prompting Tsubaki to continue. She did. Well, Sakura had caused your brain to bruise and swell because she kept hitting you around your head. Naruto, if it had been anyone else, she would have killed them. Naruto's eyes went wide at this. It was plain luck that she didn't cause you to have a stroke or worse. Are you beginning to see just how harmful unrestrained impulsive behavior can be? Naruto nodded after a few seconds before finding his voice once more, responding in an astonished whisper. Yeah, I didn't realize just how damaging being careless could be, but since you put it that way. Tsubaki smiled at Naruto, proud that she had just helped him learn a very valuable life lesson. Sometimes, all it takes to make a lasting change in perspective and character is realizing the importance of the lesson. I have a feeling that we're going to see a much more restrained, thoughtful and self-controlled Naruto Uzumaki from now on. Naruto nodded solemnly, understanding, maybe for the first time ever, the importance of the lesson that so many others had tried to teach him. Jiraiya had tried to teach him this very lesson with regards to his stubborn, unyielding pursuit of Sasuke Uchiha, but it hadn't been presented in a way that he could really grasp it. Kakashi had tried to use experience to teach him this lesson, with his first bell test and the number of times he'd fallen into traps, or being victim to the nightmarish Leaf Village secret finger jutsu, 1,000 years of death, a jutsu that he had actually found to be quite useful and versatile when used creatively, but Kakashi hadn't effectively followed up on the lesson and explained it to him. Tsubaki had not only explained it to him, but had referred to specific examples from his own experience that he could draw upon to put the lesson into its proper context. This was something for which Naruto would find himself forever grateful to the woman currently laying next to him. A content smile came unbidden to Naruto's face as Tsubaki resituated herself in the bed, leaning back into him as they had been when they'd fallen asleep a few hours before. Are you okay, now? She asked. Yeah, I'm tired, again, too, he responded. It's going to be like that for you for a little while. The ups and downs, erratic sleep. It's what happens when you lose someone who's critically important to you. I'm sure there's more on your mind, but we can talk more in the morning, huh? Yeah, right now, I'm okay. I'm content, and I'm glad I'm here with you. His exhaustion could be heard in his voice as he lay back down, sleep beginning to overtake him once more. He smiled a little wider as he felt Tsubaki lean up to kiss his cheek. Good night, honey. Good night, princess, Naruto whispered as his mind relinquished consciousness to the blissful hold of slumber. When the sun's light intruded through the bedroom window, it was Tsubaki who was the first to awaken. Bleary-eyed, but feeling well rested, she turned her gaze to her bedmate's face. She couldn't help but smile lovingly at the peaceful expression that slumber had seemed to grant him. Determined not to disturb his slumber, she slowly and carefully lifted herself out of the bed, and out of his embrace. She quickly walked over to the drapes and pulled them closed. She didn't want to give anyone in Konoha a free show, after all. That right, as of last night, was Naruto's alone. Having closed the curtains, she made her way to her bathroom so that she could shower and go through her morning hygiene rituals. As she brushed her teeth, she thought about the previous night. She thought of the heartache that was all over Naruto's face, the likes of which she'd never before seen on him. She couldn't help but wonder, where were all of his friends in all of this? Did nobody come up to him and offer him any kind of comfort or assurances that they'd be there for him? Sakura called him her friend, despite the fact that she frequently beat him up. Where was she? Hinata Hyuga was always nearby Naruto when she could be, watching him, and she professed to love Naruto. Where was she? What about others? Where was his sensei, Kakashi? Where were the others who graduated with him? What about Konohamaru and his two friends? What about Iruka? Well, she could probably let Iruka's absence slide. Teaching at the academy all day was not an easy job, and it left him with very little time. She'd go by and talk to him about it, but he was probably trying to find Naruto even now. She felt she should let the scar-faced Chunin know Naruto's whereabouts, and that he was being well cared for right now. One part of her was disappointed in Naruto's so-called friends, while another part of her was almost happy that nobody had come up to him. She was glad to be the first, and if she hadn't been, would last night have happened? It may very well not have, and she couldn't have been happier that it had, but at the same time, she found herself frightened of what the future might hold for her, for him, for them. As she entered her shower and turned the hot water on, she smiled as she thought about her blonde lover. Lover. Is that what Naruto is to me? I know what I see in him, but I don't really know what we are to each other. It's like the term, lover, doesn't do it justice, she mused to herself, both curious and a bit nervous as to how she should approach this situation they were now in. There were no regrets on her part, but she knew that given Naruto's delicate emotional state, and especially his lack of experience with women, she would have to handle this very delicately. The more I think about it, the more I realize that, I do love him, but how did this happen? I've never known anything like the bond I have with this incredible young man, she mused, finding herself more and more in awe of the depth of her bond with Naruto. She pondered this as she went through the motions of washing her body and her hair. Her musings on the love she had developed for the young man who was currently asleep in her bed had caused her to lose track of time. Before she knew it, she had washed herself completely. Turning off the water and pulling a towel from the rack on the wall, she began to dry herself off. After she was dry, she wrapped her still damp hair in the towel, picked up the panties she'd walked in wearing, and left the bathroom without anything covering her body. Naruto began to stir as Tsubaki quietly pulled a clean bra and panties from her dresser after depositing last night's pair in her hamper. Before she put them on, she turned to see Naruto stirring and rubbing his eyes. She walked over to the bed and kissed him on the lips for a few seconds. Once she pulled away, she greeted him, "Good morning, Naruto." "Hey, Tsubaki, good morning." As he opened his eyes, he saw her state of dress and immediately blushed, turning his head on impulse and clenching his eyes shut. The feeling of Tsubaki's hand resting on his cheek caused him to open his eyes and turn his gaze back to her. She had the same warm, loving smile on her face that she kept bestowing on him last night, and he could see the same warmth, love, acceptance and sincerity in her eyes as well. She moved forward to kiss him once more, this time holding it for a few seconds longer while caressing his face. She pulled away a few moments after she felt him relax and gazed into his eyes once again. "Naruto," she began, "you can look at me all you want. You can touch me all you want, anywhere you want. You don't need to look away or be embarrassed if I have nothing on. I told you last night, I invited you into my home, and I invited you to share my bed with me. I have nothing to hide from you, okay?" Naruto nodded slowly, a content expression adorning his features. Tsubaki gave him another long, lingering kiss to show her sincerity to him. He relaxed a little more a few seconds into the kiss before pressing his lips back into hers. She pulled away before gently pressing her hand into his face affectionately. "Why don't you go ahead and get cleaned up while I make some breakfast for us? You can use my toothbrush." Wah, Naruto, given the fact that we shared all kinds of fluids with each other last night, do you really think sharing a toothbrush is that big of a deal?" Tsubaki asked pointedly. Naruto laughed sheepishly. "Not if you put it that way. Thanks. You're welcome. Now go on and freshen up." Naruto nodded, making his own way into Tsubaki's bathroom. Tsubaki just put the panties that she'd pulled out of her dresser on while putting the bra back for now. She settled for a red silk robe with a black sash sewn into it at the waist, the robe itself ending at mid-thigh. Pulling the robe on and tying it closed, she went into her living room and began to write a note to Tsunade, requesting a few days' leave. Once she was done with this, she pulled the towel out of her hair and began to brush it using the hairbrush she kept by her vanity. After she had made her hair reasonably presentable, she took the scroll that she had just written and placed it in the shinobi mail drop just outside her door. She sent some chakra into the seal on the drop box for a messenger bird to come and take the note to Hokage Tower. Once that was done, she went into the kitchen and began to prepare a kettle of green tea. While the tea was brewing, she began to cook a standard fare of eggs, rice and a few meats and stir-fry vegetables for the two of them to enjoy. As she did this, her thoughts went back to the blonde who was currently freshening up in her bathroom. She marveled again at the idea. She knew what she saw in him, and she knew what was there between them, but for the life of her, she couldn't figure out just how it happened. Not that she minded, by any stretch, she was rather happy with the current development. It had been 16 years since she'd had a companion to warm her bed. If there was one thing to be said for Tsubaki Kenpi, it was that she's very selective about whom she'd bring into her bed. And the fact that her current bedmate was a man like Naruto Uzumaki of all people only sweetened the idea in her mind. She heard the sound of a sharp inhale, followed by Naruto's voice saying, "Ah, that smells heavenly." "Glad you think so," Tsubaki responded with a smile, though not turning around to look at him. "Go ahead and sit at the table, this'll be ready in a minute." "You sure there's nothing I can do to help you?" "Well, if you want, you can get the pitcher to my right, here, and put some ice and water in it. Other than that, the best way you can help me is to just enjoy my cooking." Naruto chuckled at her response and did as instructed. Tsubaki saw that he was still in nothing but his boxers, even after showering. Once he'd prepared the ice water pitcher and gotten 2 glasses from the cupboards, he brought them to the table, put them at 2 adjacent places and sat down, patiently waiting on Tsubaki to finish. After a few moments, Tsubaki finished cooking and prepared 2 plates of food. Bringing them to the table with 2 sets of chopsticks, she went back and got the now finished tea with 2 teacups and brought them to the table, placing one at Naruto's place, and the other at her own. Both of them gave thanks for their breakfast and began to eat, though Tsubaki waited for Naruto to pass sentence on the first bite. When Naruto ate the first bite, the flavors overloaded his taste buds in such a manner as to cause his eyes to roll back into his head. "Wow, I never thought I'd taste something so delicious that it would rival Tsuki's ramen." He opened his eyes and looked at his hostess, who was smiling from ear to ear. "Tsubaki, this is amazing." Tsubaki blushed and beamed at Naruto's praise before digging in, herself. Breakfast was a pleasant affair for the two of them, Tsubaki deliberately keeping conversation topics light, knowing that Naruto needed to be able to think about things that weren't too heavy or deep during a time such as this. The heavy and deep thoughts would come on their own, unbidden. Both of them found the laughter to be refreshing. Naruto, as he could still feel some joy during his time of loss. Tsubaki, as she just found that she loved to see Naruto's genuine smile and hear him laugh. After breakfast was finished, Tsubaki tried to take the dishes and clean them up, but Naruto insisted that she allow him to. Before she could object, he had already created 2 shadow clones that began washing and drying the dishes. "So, Naruto began, what now?" "Well," Tsubaki started, "I've just requested a few days' leave so I can be with you." "Really?" Naruto asked, surprised. "How come?" Tsubaki leaned towards Naruto and placed a hand on his knee. "Because I know what you're going through, and I know that while you will need to be alone at times, you're also going to need someone there with you who can relate, and you'll need that someone more than you know." Naruto could hear the urgent yet calm sincerity in her voice. Looking into her eyes, he could see the pain that she was reminded of at the loss of her daughter. But it was more than that. She was hurting with him, she was mourning with him, grieving with him. Strangely enough, he found the fact that someone knew his pain and could feel it with him to be very comforting. And yet, there was also something deeper. almost as though his heart could find true rest with this woman. She could see what he was feeling, and even who he was beneath all of the walls he had put up around himself, and beneath the layers of emotional defense that he had built over years, and once penetrated, she didn't attack, she instead sought to protect the vulnerable person within, to support him, and even to strengthen him. She moved from her chair and into his lap, straddling him as she faced him in his chair. He instinctively brought his arms around the woman to hold her in place and also to hold her to himself. His breathing quickened as she brought her hand up towards his head and strummed her fingers through his hair, though he frowned in confusion. Noting his confusion, Tsubaki asked him, "What's the matter?" "I don't really know," Naruto admitted. "I guess I'm just not sure what to think or what to do right now." "Well, what's the biggest thing bothering you right now?" "I wouldn't so much say I'm bothered, as much as I'm confused. I mean, what do we do from here? How did we come to be where we are? I mean, do you regret it, Naruto?" she asked with concern, interrupting his train of thought. "No, no, please don't get the wrong idea," he quickly reassured her, rubbing his arms up and down her silk-clad back, eventually bring them to rest on her upper arms as he held her steady. "I don't regret it at all. I guess I just—" Naruto clenched his eyes shut and shook his head back and forth in frustration, sighing in quiet exasperation before he finished. "Cammy, there's so much stuff swimming in my head right now, I don't even know where to begin talking about it." A soft hand to his face stilled his head. He opened his eyes to gaze into Tsubaki's own. The care, concern and acceptance in her eyes were all as plain as day to him. He also saw sincerity and longing. But longing for what, exactly? Was it longing for him? That was part of it, certainly, but he could see that there was more to it than that. Longing for his own acceptance of her. Longing to help him. Longing to know his mind and heart. He could see it all, and he still didn't understand how it was possible. Tsubaki spoke up after a few more moments of silence. "You're hurt, you're angry, you're sad, you're ashamed, you're content, you're ecstatically happy, and you're scared all at the same time. You're also confused about feeling everything at once and you're frustrated because you don't know what to do with any of it. How am I doing?" Naruto's eyes had steadily kept getting wider as she identified everything he was feeling. She wasn't wrong on a single count. How? He stuttered out, stunned at her seemingly psychic ability to read him. She smiled at him before leaning in to gently and chastely kiss him. Once she pulled away, she answered his question. "There's an old saying, the eyes are the gateway to the soul. And I've looked into your eyes enough times to know what's really behind them." She stopped as she saw his eyes alight with understanding before she smiled and continued. "You know exactly what I'm talking about, don't you?" Naruto's face slowly softened into a smile. Yeah, I do. I can see so many things in your eyes, even now, and I don't know how it's even possible. You know, if it was anyone but you, I'd feel a bit edgy at how we're able to read each other. But knowing that it's you, it feels nice. It feels right, somehow." Tsubaki leaned in, closed her eyes and touched her forehead to his own. "I understand. I feel just as safe and comfortable with you, as well. I love how we can both really see each other. It's as new to me as it is to you, believe it or not." "Really? Yeah, I never even had this kind of connection with my husband when he was still alive." A few moments of silence followed before Naruto posed yet another question. "So, what now?" She frowned in confusion. "What do you mean?" "Well, given what we did last night, I guess I'm just not sure what this all means, you know." Tsubaki, as though expecting such a question, asked knowingly, yet with a little apprehension, "What do you want it to mean?" "Huh," Naruto responded in his confusion. "Naruto," Tsubaki explained, "I don't have the first clue as to what the future holds for either of us. And if I'm honest with myself, that does scare me." Naruto could see the apprehension in her eyes as she admitted that. "But I don't want you to be scared," Naruto offered gently. What about it scares you? A lot of things, Tsubaki admitted. I don't know if this is really well founded or not, but you're only 16, and you've got your whole life ahead of you. I'm about to be 30, and, well, I'm scared that I might hold you back from what you can really be in some ways. What would make you think something like that? Naruto asked, his tone soft, yet his surprise was evident. I can tell you're not just trying to let me down easy. What's the real issue? Before I answer that, I want you to answer a question for me. Upon seeing Naruto's nod, she asked, right now, how do you think of us? How long do you want whatever we seem to have to last? Well, I don't really know what we are, at least to each other. But if I could have it my way, Tsubaki, I don't ever want to stop being involved with you this way. In fact, the only way I'd want for this to change is for it to grow stronger. Naruto, believe me, I know you feel that way now, and I know that your feelings are genuine. Tsubaki paused for a moment, once more looking him dead in the eye, but I also know that in a time of emotional turmoil, you can feel things that aren't lasting, despite how strong they might be. But don't you deserve someone who'll likely live just as long as you will? Don't you deserve a woman who can? Tsubaki, that's enough, Naruto interrupted calmly. If you must know, I ask myself what I've done to deserve a woman as amazing and as special as you. I know how I feel, but I'm afraid to tell you because I don't want to do something that might scare you off, you know. Tsubaki, in her surprise, asked, Naruto, how do you feel about me? Are you sure you want to know? Yes, I want to know. I need to know, she answered, quietly yet desperately. I love you, he admitted without so much as hesitating. That's the only word I know that can begin to describe it, but, I don't know, even that doesn't seem like a strong enough word to use. Naruto trailed off, looking into her eyes once more, and surprisingly finding ecstatic joy at his admission to her, tears beginning to well in her eyes as she smiled widely, biting her lower lip anxiously. His resolve strengthened by what he saw, he continued, I thought I loved Sakura once, but honestly, when I'm with you, I think, Sakura who? Tsubaki laughed at that. Hey look, you know, we don't have to decide anything now. If you're scared, I don't have any problem taking things slow, there's no rush. But I know this. What I feel for you, I know I'll never feel for any other woman again, and I'll never know anyone else as deeply as I know you. And that's another quality about you that enchants me. How wise beyond your years you really are. Naruto appeared confused at this, though he seemed to be smiling in confusion as opposed to frowning in confusion, as she explained, I remember a few years ago. It was before you left on your training trip. I overheard you a few times with Konohamaru and his friends, when you were training them by playing ninja with them. Naruto's mouth went into an oh before setting into a smile, as though he'd just been caught doing something good, but I remember the advice you gave them, that there were no shortcuts to power. That if someone wanted to grow strong, they had to do it through hard work and determination, because that was the only worthwhile way to obtain greater power or skill. You showed how wise you were then, and you've shown it again, just now. Naruto saw the fear and doubt leave her eyes, replaced with a strange, warm, loving resolve, before she pressed on, I don't know what the future holds for us, but I do know this, I love what we have right here and now. I love you, far more than I've ever loved anyone else. I love how I know you the same way you know me, and regardless of what might happen in the future, I won't have any regrets. Tsubaki centered her gaze directly into Naruto's own, so as of now, I'm yours, for as long as you want me. Every part of me, all that I am, it's yours, if you want me for a week. She paused to kiss him gently and briefly, for a month, another pause to give him a kiss that was just as gentle, but lingered a little longer, or for the rest of my life, the final pause to give him a loving, gentle but very passionate kiss, as though trying to pour every loving, warm, intense, passionate emotion she felt towards him into it. Naruto, getting the hint, stood up, Tsubaki standing up with him. Naruto then scooped Tsubaki into his arms, getting a squeal of surprised joy out of her while maintaining the kiss. He then backed into the bedroom, closing the door behind him with his foot. Naruto and Tsubaki were both naked in bed, glowing in post-coital bliss. Tsubaki was leaning back against the headboard, two pillows propping her back up and providing her with some cushion against the hard wood. Naruto was laying on his back, leaning against her, his head conveniently laying between the soft mounds of her bosom. His eyes were closed as he smiled contentedly, Tsubaki's arms laying across his front as her fingers lightly played with the skin on his chest. "Thank you," Naruto whispered to the woman holding him. Tsubaki's smile could be heard in her response as she whispered back, "You're quite welcome, and thank you." "You bet," he responded, still in a whisper. They lay there for a few moments before Tsubaki asked in a soft voice, "How are you feeling right now?" "Right now, I feel okay," he replied. "I'm just glad you're here for me." "Me too, sweetie. Me too," she admitted before offering, "Naruto, how about you and I go out tonight?" Naruto turned and looked at her bemusingly. "What did you have in mind?" "Well, would you like to give a relationship with me an honest shot?" "Yeah, definitely. That would officially make us a couple, then, wouldn't it?" "What? You mean, like, boyfriend and girlfriend?" "Something like that, yes." "Oh." Naruto seemed mystified at the idea that Tsubaki had just presented him. "Well, okay. What's wrong? I don't really know what a boyfriend should do or how he should act," he answered sheepishly with an embarrassed smile. Tsubaki laughed warmly before answering, "Honey, what do you think would make me happy, or would make me feel special?" "Well," Naruto frowned in thought with his eyes closed, something Tsubaki found adorable, as he began to answer, "I think that getting you flowers and holding doors open for you and pulling chairs out for you would do that. I guess, learning what kinds of things you like and getting them for you, and taking you to do things that you like to do, things like that. Speaking of which, what kinds of things do you like, anyway? It sounds to me like you know exactly how a boyfriend should act and what a boyfriend should do." "Naruto, all of the things you said would make me feel very special. The fact that you want to find those things out makes me feel even more special. I feel special because you're so special, and of all the people you could be with, you'd choose me." Naruto smiled as she answered him before responding, "I don't know what to say, thank you, for thinking so highly of me. I think I'm the one who's getting the better end of the deal, though." Tsubaki laughed at this before Naruto finished, "So then, what would you like to do tonight?" "I'd like for us to go out for a nice dinner, and maybe just walk around the village and talk. I know the Hokage monument has a wonderful view at night," she suggested. "Well, I don't really make a whole lot of money as a genin. Honey, I'll pay the bill," Tsubaki reassured him with a smile. "I know that you don't make much money, and don't worry, I'll give you the money before we go out so that you can, officially, be the one to pay, okay?" "Well, okay," Naruto responded, a bit dejected. "Naruto," Tsubaki grabbed his attention, sensing his embarrassment, "it's okay, really. I'm a Junin who works in the hospital as a medical ninja and a doctor. I make a very good regular salary, and that's aside from mission pay. Please don't feel embarrassed." "Okay." Naruto relented with a smile, "Let's do it, then. I'll need to go out and get some nice clothes, though." "No problem. Actually, I could come with you and help you pick some things out, if you want." "Nothing but the best for my man." Naruto laughed, "It's nice having you think of me that way, and one day, it'll be nothing but the best for my woman, on my tab, of course." "Oh, of course," Tsubaki added with a laugh, "but until that day, I'm just happy you're mine, and I'm yours." "Me too. And who knows, maybe we could end the night just like this." Again, Naruto's eyes widened as he seemed to remember something. "Tsubaki, we didn't use any protection." At this, Tsubaki smiled reassuringly, though Naruto could see that her eyes were sad. Naruto, we don't need it. Naruto frowned in confusion. Huh. Why not? Because I can't get pregnant anymore. Oh, I'm sorry. It's okay. You didn't know, and it's not your fault. It happened during the night of the Nine Tails attack. All of the excessive demonic chakra hanging around in the air. It did something to my reproductive system. For some reason, I can't conceive now. I haven't even had a regular cycle in 16 years. The doctors who examined me aren't sure why, but there are trace amount of the Nine Tails chakra in my body, and somehow those traces seem to come to rest within my ovaries. Tsubaki informed him regretfully before adding, "This is also what I meant by you deserving someone else who could make you happy. I can't give you children, while any other girl could." As she finished, she began to shed a few tears. "Princess," Naruto began reassuringly, "I'm an orphan. I grew up as an orphan. I have no idea who my parents were, or even if they loved me. That didn't hurt so badly as the fact that nobody wanted to adopt me." Tsubaki seemed to flinch at that. Naruto continued, "And while I'm over that for the most part, believe me when I say, when I build a family of my own, adopting was always a part of my plan. I want to be able to take a few kids like that and make sure that they wouldn't have to know the pain I knew as a boy." Tsubaki's tears became tears of joy at Naruto's admission as he rolled over, brought her down onto the bed to lay flat while facing him and held her tightly. This time, she cried into his shoulder, but in joy, grateful that the issue of her infertility was not an issue to Naruto at all. Both of them had been so absorbed in each other's words and touch that they had failed to notice that they were suddenly not alone. "Oh my, it appears I came at a bad time," said a female voice that was very familiar to both of them. Naruto just stared like a deer into torchlight while Tsubaki turned around and faced her newest visitor, still naked as the day she was born. Hi there, Tsunade." Tsunade noted that Tsubaki hadn't turned around in a panicked fashion. In fact, she turned around rather slowly, and the sickeningly sweet smile on her face when she faced Tsunade actually unnerved the busty blonde a little. Her bloodshot eyes and tear-stained, puffy cheeks only served to make the smile look even spookier. I'm not wearing anything, Tsunade," Tsubaki offered, placing some emphasis on the woman's name. "I can see that," Tsunade began somewhat embarrassedly. After a few moments where nobody moved, Tsubaki began again, with a slight edge to her sweet tone. Naruto's not wearing anything, either, Tsunade, one again placing emphasis on her name. "I can see that, too," Tsunade responded again. Tsubaki developed a tick mark on her forehead as her eyebrow began to twitch. She growled out her next inquiry through gritted teeth, though she kept the spooky sweet smile. "So then, why are you standing in my bedroom doorway staring at us when it is perfectly clear what we've just been doing, especially when I know the bedroom door was closed, Tsunade?" Tsunade, now starting to sweat and blush a little, replied somewhat hastily, just come back some other time, sorry to have bothered you." "Tsunade," Tsubaki began quickly, dropping her spooky sweet demeanor, causing the woman to freeze in her tracks while sighing in relief. "Why don't you wait in the living room for us? We'll be out in a couple of minutes. Close the door, please." "Sure," Tsunade was rather quick to say, and even quicker to comply. Tsubaki sighed as she turned back to Naruto. "Well, the cat was going to be out of the bag by tonight, anyway, I just didn't expect it to happen quite like that." "Yeah, no kidding," Naruto responded in a deadpan. "Well, I guess we ought to get dressed." Yeah, with that, the two of them got out of bed and quickly threw on a couple articles. Tsubaki also took a minute to splash some water on her face to remove some of her teary residue. Once they were at least presentable enough, they went into the living room to talk properly with their unexpected visitor, who was sitting on the loveseat. Tsubaki was in the same panties and red silk robe she'd had on before, while Naruto had just thrown on his boxers and pants, leaving his top shirtless. "Well, good morning," Tsubaki addressed Tsunade as she and Naruto both sat on the couch that was perpendicular to the loveseat while both articles of furniture touched at the corner. Good morning, Tsunade began, clumsily. So, what's going on with you two? Nothing that isn't mutually consensual, I assure you, Tsubaki answered quickly in a tone that indicated Tsunade should probably leave it at that. So what brings you by? You're not often here this early in the morning. No, I'm not, and I'm sorry for not knocking on your bedroom door. I know we have our standing policy of walking into each other's homes without having to knock, but I should have known better than to take it that far. Please, forgive me, she asked awkwardly. Sure. Just don't do that again, okay? Front door's one thing. Bedroom door, that's an entirely different matter. Tsunade nodded and looked at Naruto, who was looking down in what seemed to be guilt and shame, who also responded in a somewhat subdued tone, yeah, it's cool. Tsubaki, noticing his tone of voice, looked over at him and saw his guilt-ridden posture, and added, tell you what, I'm going to spend a little time getting dressed. I think you two could use a few minutes. Naruto looked at Tsubaki and smiled in gratitude, while Tsunade simply raised an eyebrow. Tsubaki went into the bedroom and closed the door once more, leaving Naruto alone. Tsunade turned her attention to Naruto and began to ask, so, why do we need a few M? Her eyes went wide as she was interrupted by Naruto's jumping towards her and clinging to her, his head buried in her chest. She noticed that her top was beginning to soak through, and she realized he was crying. I'm sorry, he mumbled through his tears and through his face buried into her bosom, though she could just make out what he was saying, I'm so sorry. Tsunade could only take a few moments to collect herself and wrap her own arms around his back in a clumsy attempt to comfort him. Naruto continued, what I said to you yesterday, it was wrong. It was cruel. I was angry, and I just started shooting my mouth off. Naruto, I understand, Tsunade interrupted him, it's alright. No, it's not alright. Naruto exclaimed indignantly, I had no right to say what I said to you. You had far more history with the pervy sage than I ever did, and I can only imagine how much it must have hurt you to get the news. Naruto continued crying into her gray GI top before adding a few moments later, please, forgive me. I forgave you the moment you said it, Tsunade responded immediately, and Naruto could hear her own voice cracking in her response. He looked up from her chest and saw that she had started crying as well. This caused more tears of his own to flow as he pulled away from her chest and wrapped the woman into another hug, this time with his head resting in the crook of her neck. Tsunade responded in kind, wrapping her own arms around him, bringing one hand up to the back of his head and kissing his face while crying with him. I'm grieving, too, Naruto. I miss him just as much as you do, Tsunade admitted while they continued crying into each other. Neither of them noticed that Tsubaki's bedroom door was slightly ajar, and that she had been spying on their little moment. They both needed this, Tsubaki thought to herself as she quietly closed her door, a smile on her face at the touching moment that her love and her best friend shared with each other. With happy thoughts and a bright outlook, she proceeded to get dressed in a pair of brown feminine shorts with a lime green sleeveless versus neck form-fitting blouse that she had tucked into her waistline. Upon exiting the room, she saw that Naruto and Tsunade were both still crying in each other's arms. She came around the back of the couch and wrapped her own arms around the pair of them. The two of them seemed to instinctively include Tsubaki in their comforting embrace. After a few minutes, they all separated from each other, with Naruto and Tsubaki taking the seats that they'd had previously on the sofa while Tsunade was in the love seat facing the couple. So, Naruto told me about what he'd said to you in your office after coming back from his last mission, Tsubaki began, addressing Tsunade. I told him a few things about Master Jiraiya's mission that he didn't know. Have you two managed to sort everything out? I think so, Tsunade replied before turning to Tsubaki's blonde companion, Naruto. Yeah, we're good. Good. I'm glad to hear that, Tsubaki responded. So what exactly brought you here at this time in the morning, Tsunade? Your request for leave. Ever since you returned to duty, you've never taken a sick day or even a personal day, so I wanted to come by and find out what was wrong. Tsunade smirked before adding with a teasing chuckle and a mischievous glint in her eye, and to let you know, I approve your request, wholeheartedly. Both Naruto and Tsubaki blushed at this. Tsubaki chose to respond sheepishly. Well, while I appreciate that, that's really not the reason that I asked for the leave. She trailed off before adopting a more sober expression. I requested the leave mostly because I want to help Naruto through this in any way I can. Tsunade nodded understandingly at Tsubaki's answer, knowing that she was in a way uniquely qualified to help Naruto. Having lost her most precious person, her daughter, recently enough that the pain was still somewhat fresh, she knew, even better than Tsunade did, just what Naruto was going through, Naruto having lost a man who had been in many ways his most precious person. She could also see that, even beyond the obvious, Naruto and Tsubaki shared some kind of connection with each other. It wasn't something tangible that she could point at, but it was definitely there, and it was something remarkable to behold. She was brought out of her musings when Tsubaki brought her attention back to the moment, which brings up another question, Tsunade, where are Naruto's friends right now? He left your office yesterday morning, didn't he? Why was I the first one to make an attempt to help him with this? Because I didn't find him until late last night. Well, I can't speak for them, but, Tsunade turned her attention to Naruto, I can tell you that Shikamaru seemed affected by what happened once he got the news. He wasn't oblivious to how it would affect you, either. I've given him an assignment that will likely require your help, so that'll give him an excuse to find you sooner rather than later. He'll track you down in the next day or two. Naruto smiled softly. Good old Shikamaru, he always was a stand-up guy. Tsunade smiled herself at that, glad for Naruto that he had at least one friend she knew he could count on. So anyway, do you two have plans for later? I'd like to maybe spend some time with you, she finished in a hopeful tone. Actually, Tsubaki answered, tonight we'll be going on our first date. I'm going to take Naruto out and about today to help him find some suitable date wear. Ah, I see, Tsunade answered knowingly, before continuing after a few moments' pause, by any chance, have either of you ever eaten at Phoenix Hall? You mean, the really ritzy restaurant in the clan district? Naruto asked in surprise. I could never afford to eat at that place in a million years. Tsunade offered a knowing smile. I'll make reservations for the two of you at 7 tonight. Don't worry about a thing, she quickly added before Naruto could object. I'll take care of all the arrangements and the logistics. All you two need to do is show up. Thank you, Tsunade, Tsubaki answered happily. Once more before Naruto could object, we'd be honored to accept such a generous offer. Very well, then, Tsunade replied. Both of you have a wonderful day, and a wonderful evening as well. Naruto, come to my office in 3 days, there's the matter of Jiraiya's estate to be executed. What? Naruto asked in confusion. It means that he left a will, and named you an inheritor. He left you a few things. Oh, okay, he responded, becoming somber and subdued once more. Alright, then, you two, Tsunade said understandingly, I'll take my leave now. Naruto, I know you have Tsubaki, but if you ever need to talk to someone else about Jiraiya, my door's always open to you, okay? Naruto smiled and nodded. Thanks, Grandma. I'm still not that old, brat. You'd best remember that if you know what's good for ya, Tsunade retorted with a playful smirk. With that, she stood up and showed herself out. Naruto turned to Tsubaki, asking with a nervous edge, so, how are we going to pay for dinner at Phoenix Hall? Didn't you hear Tsunade? She said she'd handle the logistics. That means she's picking up tonight's tab. Oh, Naruto responded as understanding suddenly came to him. Well, why didn't she just say that? Tsubaki giggled before responding, "Come on, you. Let's get cleaned up again so that we can head out." Tsubaki had only added a pair of light white leather strap-on sandals to her outfit upon leaving her apartment. Naruto was wearing the white t-shirt and blue pants she'd found him in last night, along with his ninja sandals. Both of them were walking through the village streets, on their way to get Naruto some nicer clothes. Naruto had never imagined that he'd enjoy clothes shopping, but the idea of doing it with Tsubaki actually promised to be fun in his mind. Naruto suddenly adopted a forlorn expression when he and Tsubaki passed by the convenience store where he'd bought his popsicle the night prior. "What's wrong?" Tsubaki asked, sensing his depression. "I bought my popsicle in that store last night." Tsubaki frowned thoughtfully at his response. "Naruto, what's the significance of that popsicle? I'm making a fairly educated guess here that there's a story behind it." He smiled sadly and looked downward slightly as he began to explain, "Yeah, there is. You see, when the pervy sage and I were looking for grandma to bring her back here, one of the places we stopped at was Atofika town. There was a festival going on at the time, and I remembered seeing a man sharing a double-stick popsicle with his son." Tsubaki gasped inaudibly and widened her eyes as he continued, "I wondered what it must be like to have a father that cared for you. And it really got me down that I couldn't even begin to guess. Well, Pervy Sage was also training me in the Rasengan at the time as well, so I left town at that point and went back to training. After a few hours, he'd found no trace of Tsunade there, so he came back and found me." Naruto's voice began to break, tears beginning to stream down his face as his smile, while still sad, became a fond one as well. He had one of those popsicles with him, and he shared it with me. That was the first time I had any kind of idea what it must have felt like to have a dad. Tsubaki began shedding tears of her own, turning Naruto towards herself and hugging him, wrapping her arms around his neck and resting his head on her shoulder while kissing his face. "What a wonderful experience that must have been for you," she ventured in a faraway tone. After breaking the hug, Tsubaki suddenly had an idea. Grabbing his hand, she smiled and beckoned, "Come with me." He allowed her to lead him into the convenience store. As they entered, Tsubaki made a beeline for the freezer and started looking. Naruto just stared at her in confusion as she searched the contents of the freezer. After a few moments, her face lit up. "Yes, there it is," she exclaimed as she opened the freezer and picked out a white-wrapped frozen treat. Looking at the wrapper, Naruto saw that it was called a lovesicle. Tsubaki then led him to the cash register and paid for the frozen goodie. After exiting the store, she led him to the bench where she found him last night. As they sat down, she opened the package in her hand and pulled out a double-stick popsicle that Naruto had never seen before. It was cherry red, and each half of the popsicle was heart-shaped, only connected at the very edge. Tsubaki split it and gave one half of it to Naruto, who took it with an intrigued smile. Naruto also noticed that connected to both halves of the lovesicle was a long string of candy. "Do you know what the idea behind this is?" Tsubaki asked, referring to the lovesicle they were sharing. Naruto shook his head in the negative. Tsubaki explained, "Well, the ends of the candy string are frozen inside each heart. When we're through eating the hearts, we start eating the candy string, and we meet in the middle, finishing the lovesicle with a kiss." Naruto smiled, "I like this thing, already. Let's get started, then." They both started on their half of the lovesicle. Naruto noticed that the flavor of it was quite a bit richer and sweeter than the popsicles he and Jiraiya used to share. His tongue was flooded with sensations of a rich, sweet, tart, and concentrated raspberry flavor. After a few minutes, both had finished their hearts and started on the string. Tsubaki tried eating the string teasingly slowly, but Naruto just grinned and moved in to kiss his new girlfriend, sucking the string into his mouth as he did so. While their lips were connected, Naruto pushed small amounts of the string into Tsubaki's mouth so that she could enjoy it, too. After 2 or so full minutes of having their lips locked together, they separated with a smile, Naruto breaking the string in the middle with a chomp before pulling away, both of them laughing together. They spent the rest of the morning just getting Naruto a few outfits that he could wear out that evening. Tsubaki liked surprises, so she helped him pick out several that he could choose from for the night, and even helped him pay for them. Once they were done, and Naruto had his outfits packed within several suit bags, they stored them into a sealing scroll that Tsubaki had brought along. Once finished, they decided to visit Ichiraku's for lunch, making their way with Tsubaki holding Naruto's arm in both of hers and leaning on it, both of them smiling wistfully. Along the way, they ran into someone that Tsubaki didn't expect to see. "So, that's how it is for you, now, huh?" asked a bitter, angry female voice. Naruto and Tsubaki both turned to see Abara. Tsubaki asked in surprise. "So you and him?" Abara continued, her tone still angry. "Is he your little boy toy, now?" "Lady, who the hell do you think you are talking to her like that?" Naruto objected loudly. "And just who the hell do you?" Tsubaki interrupted him by placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. Looking to Tsubaki, he saw her shaking her head at him. "Don't bother," she explained, "it's not worth it." "And what's that supposed to mean, huh?" Abara rounded on Tsubaki angrily. "It means, Abara," Tsubaki retorted, "that just because you're angry, hateful and miserable, it doesn't mean the rest of us have to be. What happened to you happened 16 years ago. I should know, because it happened to me as well, and it took just as much from me as it did from you. But that doesn't mean that I'm going to settle for the rest of my life being defined by that incident. As cruel as this may sound, get over it." Tsubaki began leading Naruto away, leaving a stunned and upset-looking Abara. She stopped briefly and turned around, addressing her former friend, "And to answer your question, no, he's not my boy toy. He's the man I'm involved in a loving, healthy adult relationship with. And I'm happy with him. I'm happier with him than I've ever been with anyone else." Abara's eyes widened in shock at that admission. Tsubaki led Naruto away once more, this time not bothering to stop and look back. Had she looked back, she would have seen the single tear that Abara shed at her words, bringing forth not only old wounds, but also a few new ones upon reflecting on the truth of her former friend's hard words. Once they'd gotten to Ichiraku's, they had both all but forgotten their encounter with Abara. All smiles once they got there, Tsuki greeted them, and then cheered loudly when he saw the indicators that told him what Naruto and Tsubaki's current relationship was. Ayame came around at her father's cheering, and seeing what he saw, she not only cheered for them, but she jumped the counter and tackled the pair of them in a tight hug, congratulating them heartily. After lunch, Tsubaki and Naruto parted ways, with Tsubaki telling Naruto to pick her up at home at 6:30. Tsubaki explained to Naruto that she wanted to surprise him tonight, and that she also wanted him to surprise her in some way. With that, she left him to do what he